You can't transform your business if you won't transform yourself first. But most CEOs, they try to fix everyone else and then wonder why nothing changes.
The biggest mistake a CEO will make is initiating transformation to fix his people. My people need to be fixed. It has nothing to do with me. It's just them.
As a business coach to tech executives, one of the first things we talk about is their leadership style, because I'll tell them like, oh, you're working 108 hours a week every single week. What if I told you the problem's probably you? And most of the time they say, no, it's my boss. It's the company I work for.
If you and I were in an elevator meeting for the first time and you asked, what do I do? I tell you, I'm in the business of producing miracles. And CEOs hire me when they're looking to create a breakthrough and they're not sure how to do it with existing resources. So I work with them to create disruptive strategies, and those strategies transform into either disruptive technology and or allows them to penetrate an untapped market. If you're the CEO and you are not intentionally creating problems, you should be fired or retrained. Really understanding who you are, and I kind of hate to say it this way, but what's your value proposition to your spouse? I know that sounds like business, but there has to be some value that you provide to them. Otherwise, why are they with you?
Our guest today is a master of transformation, whether it's a struggling company, an untapped market, or even your perspective on leadership. As the founder of Turnaround Investment Partners, Ted Santos has helped CEOs break through barriers and redefine success. So let's find out how he does it. So Ted, I want to just kind of jump right in, my friend. Thanks for being here. What can you tell me? What's the biggest mistake CEOs make when trying to turn their business around?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I look forward to this conversation. And man, talk about jumping out the gate. That's a great question to start. And it's really not difficult to answer. And it doesn't matter which industry the CEO is in. And the biggest mistake, and I've heard even Fortune 500 company CEOs admit to this, and that is transform. So turning around a company also is going to require you transforming your corporate culture. And the biggest mistake a CEO will make is initiating transformation to fix his people. My people need to be fixed. This has nothing to do with me. It's just them. And once they're fixed, we'll be on our merry way of turning it around. And that almost never works. So the correct way to do it is for the CEO to transform themselves first, and the rest of the organization will follow. But you just find, if a CEO is honest, they will tell you, we tried it the hard way. Let's fix those people.
Yeah, no, I know as a business coach to tech executives, one of the first things we talk about is their leadership style, because
Right.
I'll tell them like, oh, you're working 108 hours a week every single week. What if I told you the problem's probably you? And most of the time they say, no, it's my boss. It's the company I work for. It's my team. And I'll say to them, even so, let's say it's your boss. Who's responsible for letting your boss know what your job's like and how your job operates, and making sure you set boundaries with your boss? Or if it's your team, who hired and trained the team? Like, these are things they don't realize, that like everything that happens in their department is affected by them. And so I love that answer, that, you have to transform culture, and the first place to transform culture, right, is the guy at the top.
Exactly. Exactly. So you brought up something interesting, working these really long hours. I'm up to here in work. And I've seen even Fortune 100 companies where the culture of the company is for everyone to say, I'm up here to work, so you can't put anything else on my desk. And it's not that they are working up to here, it's just a strategy to keep things away, or to be able to have pushback and legitimately, or so-called legitimately, pushback by saying, I'm already up to here, I can't do anything else.
Yeah, it's a big excuse that they use. I know though, the thing is, as far as like being the leader and like everything else sort of follows. I always tell this story that, years ago I was a CTO for a restaurant delivery service, and we had a system set up where we had like a wireless backup system for internet. And one time we used AT&T for our internet at the time, and one time the internet just went down, and I call AT&T and they tell me, oh yeah, we were working outside and someone cut a line. It's going to take about 2 hours or less to restore your service. So go ahead and switch to your backup for now.
Right.
And we had a big call center with people in there, and I'm just walking around letting people know, it's going to be a little slower for a couple of hours. And my
Right.
CEO calls me into his office and he goes, "You don't look worried enough." And so I looked him in the eye and I said, "Why would you want the guy that leads your technology initiatives to walk into the call center when there's a problem and look like
Frantic.
life is coming to an end? Why
Right.
would you do that? As a leader, you want to show people that you got this under control. There's no
Right.
problem here. Not the,
Exactly.
oh my God, the sky is falling."
Exactly.
And he gave me this look like, wow, I never thought about that. But until you face it, it is what it is. So here's a good one for you. What's the first step that a company needs to take to break out of stagnation? So, you mentioned the culture issue of like, oh, I'm up to here in work, and they use that as an excuse. I kind of think
Right.
that does cause stagnation. So what's something they need to do to break out of stagnation?
So when I go into a company, if you and I were in an elevator meeting for the first time and you asked, what do I do? I tell you, I'm in the business of producing miracles. And CEOs hire me when they're looking to create a breakthrough and they're not sure how to do it with existing resources. So I work with them to create disruptive strategies, and those strategies transform into either disruptive technology and or allows them to penetrate an untapped market. And then I work with them to transform corporate culture to ensure the culture doesn't sabotage that breakthrough initiative. And just as a side note, most breakthrough initiatives fail in corporations. Uh, and and I guess I'll kind of answer that by answering your questions why they fail. So instead of going in and saying, let's jump to your breakthrough initiative, where I start is for people to unlearn and uncover many of the blind spots and mental barriers they have. So saying I'm work is up to here, there's some mental barrier. And even though it's the culture and everyone here does it, the strange thing is you bring in a really high performer, either when they join the company, either they're going to leave because they see their stagnation, or they're going to just join the pack. And they're also going to say, I'm up to here and work. When you really look at a human being, our actions are really correlated with what we say. Like Henry Ford said, if you believe you can or you believe you can, it doesn't matter. That's the one you're going to respond to. So it's working with people to uncover these sort of sacred cows, these beliefs, these conversations that happen throughout the enterprise that shape, why are you saying I'm up to here? I interviewed I worked with another Fortune 100 company, and they were telling me, I interviewed several people who all told me the same thing, and it was different departments. They said, hey, look, this is the way it goes here. My boss gives me a project, and they call it a burning platform. So I'm going to prove that, hey, this can't be done. I'm up to here. It doesn't make sense. And that was the call. And this was a Fortune 50 company, very successful, loved on Main Street and Wall Street. But that was just the culture. That was part of a culture. So to unlearn that, right? So sometimes people are making up stories in their head about what they think is going on, and they create this whole new reality and they respond to it. So there's this vindictive, I've got to get you back for holding it on your desk for 2 weeks, and here's how I get you back. So um, people don't often see that they're shooting themselves in the foot in the long run. So, and we're out here trying to get people engaged, but we don't really know they're having all these conversations going on in their head.
Makes sense. So you mentioned, that person says, "Oh, it's a black plague culture here," and not, even no matter how good you are, you're going to get infected with that. How did
Right.
management react when they heard this?
I guess they kind of knew that. There was
That's what I
really no
figured.
surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's what I was getting at is actually I think a lot of times they're not surprised. They know that they have this problem. They just don't know how to solve the problem. So you mentioned that like you go into companies and you're in the business of producing miracles, right? So you're going to come to a CEO, you're going to sit down, you're going to interview them. How difficult is it to get them to listen when you approach them like that?
Well, if I'm brought in by the board or the CEO, that company in particular, the my first conversation was with someone who eventually became the CEO. um, they called me in to fix their sales team, and they were telling me, "Oh, our sales team is this and that." And blah, blah. So I started asking questions, and I said, "The sales team." So now we're talking about management, and you could see where the problem really wasn't the sales team. There was a problem at the top. And he said, "Well, I'm not surprised you said that. I guess I can kind of see that." So people see it, but it's like I said, you asked what's the biggest mistake a lot of CEOs make is they want to fix other people and they don't want to deal with what's happening at the top, and everything else is rolling downhill, and the salespeople just catch it. In that company, there was no CEO or president at the helm of the ship. The employees were running it. They had executive team, but the employees were making their own sort of policies and shaping corporate culture. So I took one person and said, "I'm going to make you the CEO," and I trained him to be in that position, which turned things around for them.
Yeah, years ago, when I worked for this company, we had multiple different departments, and there was a sales department. And one of the things that had happened with this company was they had grown from like the three owners had done every job in the company, and they had
Right.
hired a bunch of people who now had worked there with them for the entire time the company had been open. So there was a lot of like loyalty towards those employees. And they had one guy who was the sales director, and they hired a woman as a salesperson, and she was clearly management level. Like she had done this
Okay.
before. She
Right.
wasn't just a salesperson. But I think at the time, if I remember correctly, the economy wasn't that great. So she's taking this job. It started to become this thing where conversation was, oh, she's undermining him. And I'd sit there and I'd think about it. And I'm like, she's not undermining him. She's actually running circles around him because he's not really meant to be the director of the sales department. He just sort of plopped into that position because he's been here for
Right.
so long. And eventually, what ended up happening was he left and she took his role. But there was a lot of people that had like animosity because, of course, the other guy, to cover up for his inadequacies, would complain that, well, she doesn't listen and she's doing this and she's doing that. And I'd say to myself, sales have been struggling until that woman came along.
Right.
And she
Right.
came along, and not just her, she's not the only one producing now. Your entire team is producing, which tells me you
Wow.
brought something to the table as just a salesperson that you weren't bringing as the leader. And so, I mean, that brings me to, so you go into a company, they're struggling. What's a common leadership trait that you see in struggling companies, and how do you fix it?
Uh, so I'll say that you see it from the macro. So a company that's in trouble and doesn't know it is a successful company.
Yeah, it makes sense. So how do you help them develop a truly disruptive strategy instead of what most companies focus on, which is incremental improvements?
Right. And I know you're a process guy, so
Big time.
you can't cut your way to growth. Right? You can make all the cuts and be more efficient, but if you're not bringing on new business, growing existing clients, you may become obsolete. So from where I stand, if you're the CEO and you are not intentionally creating problems, you should be fired or retrained immediately. So that is my intent, is to come in and train that CEO to create problems. And there are many leaders, CEOs, the founding fathers declaring independence from Great Britain. I mean, that was such a huge problem that they put their lives on the line. But another great one from more than 100 years ago is Henry Ford. When Henry Ford came into the car business, and by the way, most people, do you know which car company was Henry Ford's first car company?
No.
Cadillac.
Oh, how interesting. I didn't know
Right.
that.
He abandoned it because his investors wanted him to make a luxury car, and that's not what he wanted to do. So when he came into the industry, automobile cost about $1,500. Average person made about $750 a year. So only the top 2% of the population could purchase a car, and it took 9 months to make it. So the problem Henry Ford created was he said, I'm going to make an automobile that most households can afford. How do you do that? If it's $1,500 and 98% of the population can't afford it, that's a huge problem to solve. So he took it from a 9 month manufacturing process down to 9 days, down to 9 hours. And he started with an $850 price tag. And by 1927, I think it was $247. And he owned 60% of the market share.
Well, and then it makes the competitors look really bad because here somebody comes in and takes, I mean, that's a big cut in price. That's a huge cut in price. And when, I mean, what are you talking? He ends up with, he basically cut the price by 80%. So, you got these competitors saying, oh, there's no way we can make it cheaper. It's really because they weren't trying to make it cheaper. They didn't have the motivation to do what he did. And I think that's actually a really great story. So like if I want you to imagine that like you've been invited to come on like a panel discussion and it's going to be each person's going to tell some success story that they've experienced. What's a business turnaround story that you've worked on that really stands out to you?
You want it for an enterprise level? Sure. So I worked with a company that made food. They're consumable goods, and third generation, almost 100 years old. Grandfather started it at a retail bakery. Son-in-law takes over and goes into the commercial world, and now the sons have it, and they are growing it, except they are just growing with their own brand. And so there are two sons, and I work with one. And what he does is he takes one of their plants, which they were about to shut down. It was a ghost town, and he did co-manufacturing, which was very different from anything they've ever done. Required different equipment, different training, some ingredients that were the same, so there were still some economies of scale, but it was a new world for them. So they started manufacturing products for other people, and the other people they could now focus on selling their product, getting it into the big box retailers instead of worrying about who's coming to work and which equipment broke, all these problems. But so my client, they were the masters of manufacturing. They had all the certifications for quality. They had everything. So it was one of those tangential strategies. Like we already have facilities, we already have equipment, we have employees, we know the whole process and how to do this. So it grew their revenues by about 30% in that first year. And even the largest client the company had ever had was through co-manufacturing.
So that's interesting because it reminds me of like with the e-commerce explosion, and with the internet growing, all these 3PLs that handle distributing products for people. It's another one of those issues where they don't have to worry about a warehouse, how to store it, all the software that runs the warehouse, the people that pack and ship. They just contract with a company that's an expert at that.
Right.
It just makes sense. I mean, I always say to people, especially they'll ask my wife and I how we run 8 different businesses. And I say, we hire people who can do what we can't do.
Right.
And
exactly.
all we do is manage them via the numbers. We if the numbers are good, then they're probably doing okay. And if the numbers are not good, they're probably not. And we take a deep dive and we keep an eye on it. But I mean, it's hiring people who know how to do certain tasks that you don't know how to do. It's a humbling experience, but also majorly popular for your growth. So I know you wrote a book. It's called Here's Why You Can't Find Love. And
that kind of leads me to like, what's the connection that you find between being a strong leader in business and successful in personal relationships?
So mindset is really important. So I wrote the book, and people would say, "Wow, you work with CEOs. Why are you writing a book about love, about relationships? Like, what's the connection? It makes no sense." So there are a couple of things. There's a problem to be solved, and no one's talking about it. So corporate America is losing $300 billion every year in workplace productivity. Do you know why?
Off the top of my head, no.
Divorce.
Makes sense because you're completely distracted. I mean, I've been through a divorce. I know what it feels like, and you're completely
Exactly.
distracted. It's like, I think some people, not enough people realize this, but it's like experiencing a death in your family. It really is.
Right. So they said that when a person is going through divorce, their productivity drops by 50 to 75%. That's a lot, right? So, and if you think you're running a large enterprise, you could have a percentage who are of employees headed for divorce, another percentage in the middle of it, and another percentage just came out of it. That's a lot of distracted people. I had a buddy who could afford uh, through his divorce to just take off 1 year to recalibrate his life. And not everyone can afford to do that. So they're sitting at work, just going through the motions, and they're unproductive. So we have a $300 billion problem that's sucking profits out of companies. And, I guess one way as an organization to deal with that is you just lay people off randomly, right? Which then creates financial strain on couples who are not having problems, and then they end up in a divorce. So it creates
Yeah.
this downward spiral, right? So almost like we're slitting our wrists while running a marathon. So I wrote the book by using many of the methods that I use in training corporate America, and I just transferred them to relationships, which so people can see that they're transferable. So the very skills you develop in the workplace can be very appropriate to creating a better marriage. So one of I forget who did this study, but there was a study of executives around the U.S. and they asked, "What's the number one skill you wish you were better at?" And it was conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is really important at work, especially when you're dealing with breakthrough initiatives, and it's extremely important with your spouse. And so they have found there's a guy, Thomas Stanley. He wrote those books on the millionaire next door and selling to the affluent.
Right.
And one of the things that he found was that uh, div- divorce rates amongst the affluent is low. And it's not because they were married as affluent. These are people who were just regular people married, became affluent. But what they had from others is that even when everything went wrong, like the couple is sleeping out of their car because the husband lost his job or business shut down, whatever happened, or moves in with their parents, that they didn't split up because they both knew they picked the right person. And if we work together, we'll work this out. Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad Poor Dad is one person who slept out of his car. His wife never met. And we see where they are at now. So there are, and that's because of compatibility. So really understanding who you are, and I kind of hate to say it this way, but what's your value proposition to your spouse? I know that sounds like business, but there has to be some value that you provide to them. Otherwise, why are they with you? And vice versa. And so if you're compatible in how you manage money, how you manage conflict, sex, how do you want to raise your children, how do you want to discipline them, where you want to live, how do you take care of your health, mental, physical? If you're compatible in those areas, they tend to not change.
That's actually something that I've lived. I mean, my first wife, we were great co-parents, but we
Right.
couldn't agree on pretty much anything else. And, my current wife, the value proposition idea is the perfect analogy because I don't worry about what have you done for me lately, that sort of thing. I worry more about, what am I doing for her? And then
Right.
in return, she then worries about what she's doing for me. And so rather than two people sitting around going, well, I'm not going to do that for them because they didn't do this for me. You just keep
Right.
doing your thing and they keep doing their thing, and it builds up your relationship. And you're right. Like, I was thinking about it as you were talking. If ever, our business is shut down and we had to live in a car, I know she's not going anywhere and she knows I'm not going anywhere. And I
Perfect.
think those are the things that help you get through those
Right.
issues, is you have
Exactly.
that support system, right? Like, it's just, something that a lot of people don't have. But let's transition into one really interesting, like, less usual kind of question. All right.
Okay.
Let's see, what shall we use here? What's the weirdest leadership tactic that you've ever seen actually work?
So I guess it would have to be me. I ran a transportation logistics company. So I had my operations team, I had a manager and we had a couple of supervisors, and that and one of the supervisors was, this guy just loved people. He's just a great people person. And as a supervisor, he was maybe a little too liberal. You might say he was soft. He wasn't as firm as he needed to be. So I hired someone, and so the guy who was more liberal, I put him into his job was to solve any problem that we had. And this guy was like a master of that universe. He was excellent in that. And I put another guy in his position. And the new guy, the new supervisor, this guy was like a colonel from he was good. This guy was master in that he was really good at what he was doing. But he had about 30 people under him. And those people missed the other guy who was nicer. So there was a mutiny and they were working against him. And so I had a meeting, and it happened to be payday. So I had I had 30 some odd paychecks. They start saying, "Oh, who is this guy? We don't know him. He's no good." And so the new guy starts explaining, "No, let me tell you, I have this experience, man." And I looked, I was thinking, this is not what I expected. So I told this new guy, "Hey, stop, stop. You don't have to explain yourself." I said, "I hired this guy. He's the best in the industry and he's staying. I believe in him and there's no way that he's going anywhere. However, if you don't think you can work with him, come get your check, give me your radio and leave." And I didn't know I was going to say that because it was kind of forceful, right? And then I thought, oh my God, I just shut the company down. Everyone's gonna come get their check and leave. I thought I just made a huge mistake, and there was dead silence. Then I went on to say, hey, we have some new clients. This is what we need to do. And a few days later, I asked the new guy, "How's it going with the guy who caused the mutiny?" He said, "Oh, he's my best buddy. We're best friends now."
That's
So
strange.
the whole thing, it worked, but I never knew I was going to do it because I don't normally talk. That was an ultimatum, really, in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, but it worked because these guys liked me, and they liked me because they could ask me for, "Hey, these are 5 things that we want." And I look at those 5 things and say, "You see this 5th one here? That's a joke. I don't understand why you guys are asking. Get that out of here. But these top 2 here, I can make that happen. This 3rd one is going to take me a little time. And a 4th one, I don't know. But the top 2, I got that." So they would walk through fire for me. So I had that to my advantage. So I never used ultimatums in the past. I always managed the company looking at they're my stakeholders and I have to take care of them, just like I have to take care of the owners, the investors, and the customers and my employees. So, but an ultimatum, especially in that fashion, I just it came out. It was almost like an outer body experience.
Well, I mean, you had gained their trust. They knew you were a person who wasn't, like, abusive to the employees.
Right.
You thought about them, but you threw your support behind this guy, and they probably had to stop and think, well, okay, I trust him. He hasn't ever done anything to me.
why wouldn't maybe he knows something about this guy I don't know. Maybe I should pay a little more attention. And I think it says a lot to the guy who was causing most of the trouble to kind of become his best buddy and his ally, because he was willing to take his preconceived notions and set them aside and give it a chance. But I actually think, had you not used that ultimatum tactic, and that's why I think it wasn't something you thought of beforehand, it just sort of happened.
Right.
Your instincts told you, I have to give them an ultimatum because this is ridiculous that they're rebelling against somebody who's
Exactly.
this good, and
Right.
they woke up. I mean, I had a similar situation with a CEO who didn't like one of the staff members that I had because he worked remote. At the time, it was unheard of, but he worked remotely, and he was, believe it or not, he was our network engineer. But what he would do is he'd keep the servers and everything maintained remotely. And then when there'd be need to be a big project, he'd come into town for 4, 5, 6 weeks and work on it. And then he'd go back to where he lived. And the CEO came to me one time. It's like, we need a guy who's here all the time. And I said, if you can name 3 things that have suffered because he's not here physically,
Right.
I'll do that. Otherwise, I'm not doing that. And he sat there for a while and went, I can't even think of one thing that suffered. I said, okay, so then why would we replace a guy that's making the network hum and we never have down problems
Right.
with our servers? Our servers continue to function. Why would we get rid of the guy that made all that happen and continues to keep it
Right.
happening?
Exactly.
And I remember a couple years later, we were at a party for Christmas, and he told me, the CEO told me, I was ready to just fire both of you after you said that. But then I thought about it and I thought, well, Mike's never led me astray before. And
Right.
if he's that much behind this guy that he's going to look me in the eye and say, no, I'm not doing that, there's something here. So I give you kudos for that. That's actually really a cool story. But we're kind of out of time. I appreciate all of your insights. You've really opened my eyes to a couple of different things that I've thought of in a different way. And so I
Okay.
appreciate that. Please let our audience know, how can they connect with you if they want to reach out?
Sure. You can go to my site. It's turnaroundip.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah, LinkedIn's always easy. But thanks again for being here. I really appreciate your insights, taking the time on a Friday to chat with me. I know it's like starting afternoon time for you over there, but really appreciate it. Thanks for so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. This was a great conversation. And remember, no difference between Friday and Monday. They're both days of the week. That's it.
I love it. Well, everybody, thanks for being here for another episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. We have new episodes every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time here on YouTube and LinkedIn. Hope to see you back next week for another exciting episode.